I welcome you to lesson number 15 of the course Linguistics 2 English 504. As you can see from the title slide, you see the words written, three generative grammars. Now, we had this idea in the last lesson when we were talking about the generativism or the theory of generativism given by Noam Chomsky, and there we discussed that Chomsky made it clear that there are some grammars which are more powerful than the other grammars. Now let's first look at what we did in the last lecture, and we're going to touch this idea again. Generative grammar is a set of rules which, operating upon a finite vocabulary of units, generates a set of finite or infinite strings which is well formed in language that is characterized by the grammar. So what is generative grammar? Is a set of rules operating upon a finite vocabulary, and it generates what? It generates finite or infinite, a huge number or a limited number of strings, and they are well formed, they are well organized in the language, and this is the structure of, this is the form of language, the finished product we get through the generative grammar, through the process of changing the raw materials or the raw form, raw structures of language present in the mind into the finished product. So generative grammar is a set of rules, the rules which govern the conversion of structures into forms. The word generate does not relate to any process of sentence production. It's basically not the process which is called generate. Generate doesn't mean the process. Generate basically means the rules which govern the conversion, the transformation, the change of the raw language into a finished product or finished organized form. So we again saw that grammar of a particular language is a system of rules and principles that link sounds and meanings. Human beings are endowed with a number of special faculties. Then we saw Chomsky's idea that human beings, all the human beings, they have excellent skill, the ability to acquire language and then to generate language, to generate utterances. Like we had the example of a child. A child, when born, has and is growing up, in the process of his growing up, because of the already present grammar in his mind or her mind, keeps on adding up to that storehouse of grammar by the help of people who are around him, and whatever he hears around him, whatever he listens, the sounds, the words, the child keeps on taking them and gradually grows in the process of growing up, adds to the storehouse of his vocabulary. So that is how he is developing his language. So every human being, every man has that skill, has that ability, inborn ability to acquire language and also to generate utterances. They are endowed with a number of special faculties, which is mind. Chomsky says that there are certain phonological, syntactic and semantic units that are universal. And here we had the idea of universal grammar, that Chomsky says that there are some phonological, syntactic and semantic units which are already universal, which are present in every man, in every person. They are already present and they are genetic. They come from inheritance. They are inherited. So those grammars are called universal and they are already present with everybody. Human beings are independent of external stimuli. Chomsky was opposed to the idea of external stimuli making human beings generate utterances. He said that human beings are not affected by the external stimuli. It's basically the faculty, the mental faculty, the mental power that differentiates people from machines. Human beings have the power to acquire language and to generate utterance, generate language. All human languages are similar in structure. So when a child is born, in every child there is an inborn faculty, there is an inborn power, there is an inborn inbuilt grammar, and that is similar. So all human beings, all human languages are the same in depth. So here he again talked about the surface meaning and the depth meaning, and he said when you study the depth meaning, deep inside all the languages are same. It's only the superficial differences are there. When you look at the surface of the languages, there might be some differences in the pronunciation, but pronunciation or the way they are uttered, the sentences are uttered, but deep inside all the languages are same, because basically they are used to refer to physical world or physical objects. Alright, now then he said that there are generative grammars which are some of the grammars are more powerful than the others. Now here he introduced that the three kinds of grammars which we just mentioned in the last lesson. We are going to talk in detail about them today. He proved that finite state grammars are less powerful than phrase structure grammars. You remember this point was there in the last lesson. Finite state grammars are less powerful than the phrase structure grammars, and phrase structure grammars are less powerful than the transformational grammars. So which grammars are the most powerful? The transformational grammars. And the finite state grammars are very basic. They are less powerful than the phrase structure grammar. And now we see what are these three models. Now, finite state grammars. If the grammar is to consist of a finite state of rules operating upon a finite vocabulary, and it is to be capable of generating an infinite set of sentences, it means that some of the rules must be applicable more than once in generating the same sentences. Now, if the grammar has a finite set of rules, limited set of rules, and they are applied on a finite vocabulary, limited vocabulary, and then what is generated out of them? Infinite set of sentences, many sentences, millions and billions of sentences. They can be created out of limited vocabulary by the use of rules. You get the sentences which are never heard, and you get so many combinations, and you get so many words and so many sentences just because of the application of rules. Now that grammar means that maybe rules they can be applied to more than once in generating the sentences. You are applying the same rule sometimes again and again. You are just applying the same rule and moving the words around, moving the words at different places to generate more and more sentences. So this means that some of the rules must be applicable more than once in generating the same sentences. So again, you are sometimes applying the rule again and again in the same sentence. You are applying the same rule. So more than once you are applying it just to create combinations, just to create more sentences. Now this is basically finite state grammar, that limited vocabulary, limited set of rules being applied to limited vocabulary, and you are creating millions and billions and in fact infinite number of combinations or infinite number of sentences. This is the finite state grammar. The rules and structures they generate are called recursive. Now the rules and structures that are generated, they are called the recursive. The simplest grammars capable of generating infinite set of sentences by means of finite number of recursive rules operating upon finite vocabulary are called the finite state grammars. Now you see a proper definition of this grammar here, that the simplest grammar capable of generating many sentences, many sets of sentences. How? By means of a finite number of recursive rules. The rules are limited. You are applying them again and again to the same sentences, and you are creating many combinations. So recursive means a finite number of recursive rules operating upon finite vocabulary. Again, the vocabulary is limited, the words are limited. You are just applying the limited rules on limited vocabulary, but what is the result? It's marvelously great that you are giving us, we are generating infinite number of combinations and many sentences. So this is the finite state grammar. Now sentences are made by means of choices made from left to right. Now how do you make new sentences? You're basically making you're moving the words, you're playing with the words, changing their places. You take different choices, like you take in the vertical way and you also take in the horizontal way. So you are from left to right, you are just taking different choices, replacing nouns with nouns, replacing verbs with verbs, replacing prepositions with prepositions, and you are making new sentences. You are generating so many sentences just by taking a choice. From left to right you are moving and taking different choices of words. So every different sequence of words, well formed, of course, is a different sentence. Every time you change the sequence, you get a word, you get a different sentence, and every different sequence, it has to be well formed. Again, the rule here is that it is the rule governed, and it has to be properly arranged. So every different combination is a different sentence. Now, what are the next two types of grammars? Transformational and phrase structure grammar. We'll discuss them together because they of course are related, because the phrases, they lead to transformations, and phrases lead to sentences later. So transformational generative grammar, TGG is called. We'll refer to it as TGG in the remaining lecture. TGG consists of not only transformational rules, but includes a set of phrase structures rule as well. So both these rules are together present in the TGG, transformational generative grammar, because the phrases, again the phrases, when you add something to the phrases, you get sentences. And phrase structure rules, transformational rules, depend on the previous application of phrase structure. See, phrase structure rules, you apply the phrase structure rules and you get the sentences. You get the transformational by the application of transformation rules. You generate new sentences. Now let's proceed with transformational rules. What are they? They have the effect not only of converting one string of elements to another, but in principle of changing the associated phrase marker. Now, what are associated phrase marker? We'll talk about them when in a short while. Now, transformation rules have the effect not only of converting one string of elements into another. They convert not only one string to another, but in principle they are also changing the phrase markers. They are changing the markings which the phrase rules have phrase rules have given. They are also formally more heterogeneous and more complex than phrase structure rules. They are not the same, but you have different combinations in them. They are heterogeneous and they are more difficult, more complex. They are arranged in a more complex way than the phrase structure rules. So transformational, remember, transformational rules are basically, they have the phrase structure rules as well. And what are they doing? They are basically converting one string of elements into another, and they are also changing the markings done by the phrase structure rules. And they are also formally more heterogeneous and more difficult, more complex than phrase structure rules. All right. Now, moving on to the next slide, let's see. Chomsky states that two properties of language must be taken into account for searching the right generative grammar: the recursiveness and the constituent structure. Now let's see what they are. Both are present in the phrase structure grammar: the recursive elements and the constituent structure, the structures of the independent constituents. Now, function of phrase structure grammar. What is in fact the phrase structure grammar? What does it do? To generate strings of symbols and to assign to each a labeled bracketing. This labeled bracketing is called the phrase markers. Now this is what we discussed in the last slide, and now see what they are. Now, as you can see in this sentence, on the wooden table, and you see a preposition phrase. Every phrase has been given a marking. Every phrase has been separated. The whole sentence has been divided into different constituent parts, like the prepositions, the nouns, the articles, again the noun and the noun. So on the wooden table has been divided into small parts, small chunks, and then it is analyzed. So these are called basically your phrase markers. Now, Chomsky followed a deductive approach in giving the theoretical account of grammar. He again introduced the idea of competence performance here. The competence of a native speaker enables a speaker to produce an infinite number of sentences from a finite set. The competence of a native speaker enables a speaker to produce an infinite number of sentences from a finite set. Of course, this is the competence level, the power in the mind of a person, the competence that makes him perform, that makes him give performance, and that makes him produce infinite number of sentences just from the limited vocabulary, the limited rules, and the limited words. Is just applying the competence, is using the power of his competence to produce infinite sets of sentences. The sentences generated are grammatical and meaningful equally. They have to be grammatical, they have to be properly organized, they have to be properly structured, they have to be ordered correctly, and secondly, they have to be meaningful. There should be a logical meaning coming out of these sentences. There should be a proper structure as well as the meaning. Now, structuralists focus more on form, whereas the transformational grammar talks about form and meaning both. Now here lies the difference. The structuralists, they talk about the correct structure or the correct form or the correct order, but the transformational grammar, they also talk about the semantic side. They also talk about the meaning, that the proper meaning, the sensible meaning has to come out of a sentence. Form is important in generation of sentences. Form can only help in generating sentences, but there are other factors which are responsible for the sentences to be meaningful as well. Language is productive, complex, and arbitrary. Transformational grammar is both transformational and generative, though it is transformational and as well as generative. This is the quality of the transformational grammar, that it talks about the transformation of the sentences as well as it talks about the rules which are helping a person to generate sentences. What is the role of transformational grammar? Let us look at some of the dominant and prominent roles of the transformation grammar. It analyzes the sentences, divides them into parts. As we saw on the wooden table, the sentence was broken into chunks. So divides them into parts, demonstrates function of various parts, then it talks about the role each part is playing in a sentence, the role, the function of that part in a sentence, and then also rearranges them in order to create more combinations, in order to make it meaningful, rearranges it in order to maybe make that very sentence meaningful, and also to create more combinations. Shows interrelatedness between sentences, and when you are linking sentences to make bigger text, the transformational grammar is basically playing its role here in showing the interrelatedness between the sentences. What is the relationship between the sentences, why they have been put together, and why they are they have been joined to make larger text, and why they are at that very place, and why it's important to write a sentence in the start and then what comes after that, and how the two sentences can complement each other and create a meaning which you desire to convey. So it is the most important powerful among the three types. So if we look at the finite state grammar, the phrase structure state grammar, and the transformation grammar, this is the most organized one. This is the most powerful because it plays so many roles. It also reforms the phrase state grammar. It applies its rules to that as well, and it can change the markings, the phrase markers given by the phrase state grammar. So and it also gives us so many combinations from one sentence. So this looks to be the most powerful among the three types we are discussing. Now, TGG, transformational generative grammar, shows that only a meaningful form is not important, but meaning is also important. What we mean by meaningful form: the structure, the word as it is arranged, the structure of a sentence as it is arranged. So it's not only important that a sentence should be grammatically correct, but also semantically correct. It shows the sentences are related to one another in a sentence, how sentences are related, how the words are related to one another in a sentence in a complex sentence. How simple sentences, here we mean to say how simple sentences are related to each other in compound sentences, and how sentences are related to each other in a larger text. So in the discourse, for example, in a paragraph or in an essay, so how different sentences are related to each other, and what is the relationship of two simple sentences when they are linked together to create compound sentences. So TGG takes each part of a sentence and talks about its role. It individually discusses each part. It takes each part individually and talks about the structure and talks about the role of that part in a sentence. It is different from structural grammar. It is not the same as structural grammar. Structural grammar, they focus more on the structure. They talk only about structure, and they don't talk about the structuralists. They don't talk about the semantic part or the meaning part of the sentence. Now, TG is not a mathematical grammar. It doesn't talk only about the structure, mathematical structure. The processes it describes are not mathematical, and not mathematical processes, and the symbols it describes are not used with their mathematical meaning. So TG is not a mathematical grammar. The processes it describes are not mathematical processes, the way structuralists do it, that it is a mathematical structure. Here it's arbitrary, can be changed. The places of the words can be changed to make more combinations, to create more meanings, to create more interpretations of the same sentence. They are the symbols it describes are not used with their mathematical meanings. Chomsky's grammar is basically a generative grammar of the transformational type. It is a generative grammar. It talks about the rules. It talks about the rules which are generating sentences, but it also talks about the transformation, that you can change the places, you can create more combinations from the limited words. You can make so many sentences, you can just change their places and you can create more sentences, right? Okay. Now, what does he mean to say? He means that among the rules that extend this idea, he means that among the rules are those for transforming one type of sentences into another. Like you can change affirmative into negative, simple into compound or complex, and so forth. You have affirmative sentences, you just change the place, you introduce the verb to be, you introduce the negative, the word of negation, and you just convert a positive affirmative sentence to a negative. Likewise, you can also make an interrogative sentence. You just change the place of the verb to be and bring it in the start. You introduce the W word, or sometimes you don't even remove the word of negation and you make the interrogative negative sentence, or the interrogative sentence, just interrogative sentence, by removing the word of negation. So you are playing with all the combinations, you are playing with the words there, and you are basically capable of changing one type of structure into another structure. Whereas in structural approach, you just have the rules and they are mathematical. They just talk about the structure. They don't talk about the transformations. They don't talk about the change in the sentences, change in the meanings, change in the places of the words in order to create more combinations. Now, transformation grammar consists of two levels of representation of the structure of sentences, which includes an underlying more abstract form termed deep structure, and the actual form of sentences produced called surface structure. Now here, let's discuss in detail how the transformational grammarians they represent us, talk about the structure of sentences. Now that basically the TG talks about two levels of representation of structures of sentences. One is the surface meaning and the other is the underlying deep meaning. One is the surface meaning, how a sentence means on the surface, and what is basically the meaning in depth. Look at this point again. I would like you to focus on this point again. TG consists of two levels of representations of the structure of sentences. How the structure of sentences is represented in the transformational grammar at two levels. One is the surface level underlying more abstract meaning termed as deep. One is a deep structure, and the actual form of sentence produced called the surface structure, which is in fact heard or spoken. That is the surface structure. But in depth, it has a different meaning. That is a depth meaning, or is the meaning which you have which you call the underlying meaning. Now, surface structures are derived from the deep structures by a series of transformations. Now, it's here that the transformational grammar plays its role in transforming the surface structure, in transforming the deep structures to surface structures. So surface structures are derived; they come out of the deep structures. The deep, inside deep in the mind, the structure is present, and that makes a person generate the surface, generate sentences, and they are called the surface structures. So whatever we hear, we listen, is basically belongs to the surface structure. There might be a meaning, there is a meaning in depth which has made a person produce a surface structure. Now, let us look at this picture. A phrase structure is basically the lexical component, and that is the deep structure. So passing through the deep structure it is transformed, and then we get the surface structure, which is morphophonemics rules. Applying the morphophonemic rules, the rules of morphology, we get the sentence. So what is the outcome in the end? The sentence. But that has traveled along, right, through traveled a long distance, starting from the deep structure, the phrase structure that is present in the mind. The phrase is modified, is transformed, applying the rules, and ultimately we get a sentence, which is basically the surface structure. So moving on, we see the deep structure in detail. What is deep structure? It is an abstract representation of a sentence. Abstract representation of a sentence. Whatever sentence we hear, the representation that is the a sentence can be represented by the deep structure. That it's not the real outcome or the real picture. Whatever sentence we hear, that is basically the surface structure, but it is the representation of an abstract representation of a sentence. You can't really hear it. The deep structure is abstract. You can only imagine about the deep structure. You can't really see it and hear it. Whereas the surface structure can be heard, can be seen. When somebody is uttering, you can see the movement of the mouth organs. So that is basically your surface structure which you hear. It can be represented in the form of a hierarchical tree diagram or a phrase structure tree, depicting the abstract grammatical relationship between the words and phrases within a sentence. It can be represented in the form of a hierarchical tree diagram or phrase structure, depicting the abstract grammatical relationship between the words and phrases within a sentence. So how can you represent the deep structure? By studying the sentence, by studying the surface structure. It can be represented in the form of, this is a hierarchical diagram, or a phrase structure tree. It is a tree that talks about the phrase structure tree. And you see the relationship of the abstract grammatical relationship between different words and phrases within a sentence, and that is how you can make out what is basically the deep, the meaning in depth of a sentence. So once you are taking each word, you are studying each word, and you are also studying the relationship between different words. That is where you are basically trying to go to the depth, and you're trying to make out the meaning, the actual deep meaning of a sentence which you hear. Now, surface structure is basically version of a sentence that can be heard or spoken, as we just discussed it before, that whatever you hear or speak, that is the surface structure. That is the apparent, it has the apparent meaning, the meaning which can be heard, which can be, the sentence which can be heard, which can be spoken. But the deep structure is behind that. The deep structure is behind them, and you can only reach to the deep structure if you analyze the words. This is a very common experience in our life, that sometimes we hear sentence and we act according to the sentence without even thinking about the meaning in depth. But However, if you know the person, the style of conversation, you can make out, the person really is satirical or the person what he means in depth. But normally, if we don't know people, we don't know the style of their conversation, we hear the sentence and we take them in their surface meaning. But in fact, in-depth meaning might be different. So we can basically, the skill to understand the deep meaning comes with experience and also by the analysis of the surface structure. If you look at the surface structure and you take each word individually and you see what they mean and you see the relationship with the other meaning, and in fact also if the words are spoken, you also look at the intonation or the way they are said, then only you are able to go to the deep meaning. Now, moving on, we see a very good example here. The dog bit the cat, a very simple example here. The dog bit the cat, that is a deep structure. The cat was bitten by the dog, a surface structure. There, the meaning is shallow. The cat was bitten by the dog. There is no depth here. But the dog bit the cat, where the actual action doer has come in the start. The dog bit the cat is an active sentence, and that is why we sometimes say that the active voice sentences are more powerful than the passive voice sentences. The fact here is very clear. The deep structure, that is a deep structure. It's an active voice sentence, and this is the deep structure and in-depth meaning, and this gives us the fact in very clear way. That is the idea, that is the underlying idea behind a sentence. The cat was bitten by the dog, that is a surface structure. It's a system of formal rules specifying how deep structures are to be transformed into surface structure. So what is TGG? Transformational Generative Grammar is a system of formal rules specifying. They tell us how deep structures are transformed into surface structures, how a person utters sentences, and how the person applies rules to the deep structures, to the structures already present in the mind, how a person applies rules to them and utters the sentences. So whatever we hear may not be real. Whatever we hear may not be real. This is a very interesting words that it may have a different meaning in depth. So we have to analyze whatever we hear. We have to analyze it properly to go to the deep structures later. The rules in transformational grammar do not tell us how to produce language. They tell us the order in which to put the words and phrases. Now, rules of TG are basically not a procedure. They don't talk about the language as it is, but they in fact talk about the order, the way the words are arranged. They talk about the rule. They talk about the rule behind the generation of utterances, or the rule behind how the sentences are uttered. The rules in TG do not tell us about how to produce language, the way to speak sentences, but they tell us the order in which to put the words and phrases to make them meaningful. TGG allows us to generate an infinite number of sentences via transformations. Yes, we saw the example that where we are only playing with the words, we are changing the places, and we are making new sentences. So this allows us to generate an infinite number of sentences via transformations. You are just transforming, you are applying the rules of transformations to make infinite number of sentences, and that is basically what TGG is talking about. Grammatical transformations are the rules relating deep and surface structures. They talk about the deep structures. They also talk about the shallow structures or the surface meanings. So they are the rules related to the deep and surface structures, how the surface structures they come out of the deep structures. Coming on towards the end of this talk, finite straight grammars are less powerful than phrase structure grammars. They are just the limited the grammars which are related with the conversion of the limited or the finite rules being applied on finite vocabulary in order to create infinite number of sentences. They are less powerful than phrase structure grammar. The phrase structure grammars are less powerful than the transformational grammars. Of course, the next level we have that is the phrase structure grammar, where you get the phrases. First you get the words, the sounds, then you go on to the phrases, you start making phrases. So that those grammars, they are giving us the phrase markings. They are dividing a phrase into different parts, like we saw the example of on the wooden table, and it was the phrase markers were given on the separately. It was divided into several small different parts and then analyzed. So that was the phrase structure grammar. Of course, that at a better organization, that had stronger rules stronger rules than the finite state grammar rules. Then we had the transformational grammars. A finite set of rules operates, transformational grammars, that was the most powerful one, and we discussed in detail about that. You can again see the definition of finite state grammars, like a finite set of rules operates upon a finite vocabulary and is capable of generating an infinite set of sentences. So you get so many different sentences just through the application of rules. You have a finite set of rules, you have limited vocabulary. With limited rules, you are creating so many sentences, you are making generating so many combinations. Function of phrase state grammar: to generate strings of symbols and to assign to each label bracketing. There is a label bracketing, like we saw the preposition phrase, the noun phrases, the verb phrases, they are separated, and it's just like parsing. A very common word, like you parse the sentence, you divide it into different parts, and then you study each part individually. So transformation phrase structure grammar is just parsing, or it's separating. It's creating phrase markers, or the labeled bracketing. Every bracket has a label for the word it is separating. Then we talked about the transformation grammars. Transformation grammar talks about form and meaning both. Now this is basically the difference from the structuralists, where they are talking only about the form and they are not talking about the meaning. But this is the main difference between transformational grammar and the other approach of the structural approach, where they believed only in the correct structure, the sentence created properly, the sentence organized properly, grammatically, but they are not going to the actual meaning, or the semantic meaning, or the semantic level of the sentence. Whereas this kind of grammar, the transformation grammar, talks about the form and meaning both. It also it says that a sentence should not only be grammatically correct, but should also convey us a sensible meaning. It analyzes the sentences, divides them into parts, and demonstrates functions of various parts, and rearranges them as well. So the role of transformational grammar is very strong, where it analyzes sentences, it also divides them into different parts, and also rearranges them to create more combinations. Now transformational grammar, again we saw that it consists of two levels of representation of sentences. It takes into account two different levels, two different aspects. One is the surface aspect and the other is the deep aspect. Like any sentence when spoken can have a surface meaning, and deep inside can have a different meaning. Now it talks about two different levels of representation of a sentence. Whenever it analyzes a sentence, it analyzes from two aspects, not only from the visual aspect which is present there, but also what may be at the background, what may be in the deep meaning of a sentence. Like we see in the first bullet, the transformation grammar consists of two levels of representation of a sentence, the deep and the surface. Surface structures are derived from deep structures. Now these are basically the structures which we hear, which we hear or speak. We can experience them. We can hear around us, people speaking around us, and when we speak, we also see the movement of the mouth or the speech organs. These are basically the meanings which are apparent, which are the apparent meaning, which are visible meaning. But sometimes you have deeper meanings. Sometimes you have a different meaning in depth. The meaning may be same or it may be different, but how we can get to that meaning? That is through experience. If we know the words spoken, and if we know the meanings, the different meanings of words, with the different connotations of the words, then we may go to the deep meaning. And it's a very common experience. Here we talked about, I gave you an example of sometimes when in your everyday life you hear a sentence and you react according to it, according to what you hear. But maybe the person meant something else. There might be a different meaning behind that, and that may not be the visual meaning, that may not be the apparent meaning, the surface meaning of a sentence. However, if we know the communication style of a person, we know the way a person talks, or the way a person communicates his or her ideas, then we may go to the depth meaning immediately. It is through experience, it is through long interaction with people that we get to know what they mean deep inside, and that also sometimes can be found out through the expressions, the facial expressions. Sometimes the facial expressions, they are different. A person sometimes tells a lie. For example, let's have a very common example here, that sometimes a person can't tell a lie. He tells a lie, the words, they apparently we know that we hear the words and we believe in them, but sometimes the facial expressions are such that we don't believe. We know that a person is telling a lie because sometimes the facial expressions, they don't indicate what the person is saying, and this can come this we can learn through experience, and we can also learn through the long interaction with a person. So basically sometimes the surface meaning and the deep meaning are different, and sometimes they are the same. It's only that that we can experience this, we can get to these deep meanings through experience. And if we know the conversation style of people, and we know people are telling a lie, or people are basically criticizing, or it's a satiric talk, or it's the facts they are speaking about. So this is basically the phenomena which this point is giving us, talking about, that transformational grammar basically talks about two levels. One is the meaning, which is apparent meaning, which we see from the which we get from the words which we hear or speak, and the other meaning is the depth, the deep meaning. Surface structures are derived from the deep structures. From the deep structures, you saw in the diagram that it passes the deep meanings. The phrases are made inside the mind of a person. The phrases are made, and then the phrases are converted into finished sentences. So in-depth meaning might be different or might be the same, but it passes through a long procedure and gives us the depth meaning. So surface structures are derived from deep structures, and the rules in transformation grammar do not tell us how to produce language. They tell us the order in which to put the words and phrases. Now this is the idea which we started with, that rules, they don't tell us the production. They don't talk about the production of language. They basically talk about the how they are ordered. They tell us the order in which to put the words and phrases. So they talk about the arrangement and proper arrangement, and they also talk about the semantic aspect of the sentences. They don't talk only about the proper arrangement, but they also talk about the meaningful arrangement of these sentences, and also the meanings of the sentences, that these sentences should give us a proper meaning, a sensible meaning. So this is what we had today for the generative grammars, and we'll again have extend this discussion in the next lesson when we talk about the different transformations, the common transformations in generative grammar, what different types of changes can be made with the sentences, and what different combinations we can have from sentences by implementing different changes, that we'll discuss in detail in the next lecture. But first, before I move on to the discussion of the next lecture, I would like you to go to some key slides which need your focus. Now I would like you to go back to the first few slides where and I'm going to link it with the last lecture where we talked about the grammar of particular language, that of a system. We talked about the system of rules, and what is grammar. Basically it is a system of rules and principles that link sounds and meanings. And then we talked about the inner power of a person to create sentence, to generate utterance. And then I would like you to go to the first slide, which talks about the 3 models of generative grammar. So remember, I would like to repeat here the 3 models of grammar. The first one, the finite state grammar; the second one, the phrase state grammar; and the third one, transformational grammar, which is the most important one, which is the most powerful. So here I would like you to go to slide number 8, where sentences, we saw the sentences are made and generated by means of choices made from left to. How do we create combinations? Remember, how do we create infinite sets of sentences? By moving from left to right, by taking different choices. This is what you have to remember. How do we create? In generative grammars they talk about, since they talk about the creation of infinite sentences from finite rules and finite vocabulary, so how do we get these millions and billions and billions of these sentences? Just by taking choices. The means of choices made from left to right, every different sequence of words and every combination, the meaningful sequence, the well-formed sequence is a different sentence. Now then I would like you to go to the role which the transformational grammar is playing, functions of here. I would like you to go to the role, slide number 15, role of transformational grammar. It analyzes the sentences, it divides them into parts. Now what is basically, why is this grammar so important? Why is this grammar the most powerful? Because it's doing more than one thing. It's analyzing the sentences, it's dividing them into parts, it's demonstrating at the functions of various parts, looking individually at various parts, and then also rearranging them to get more combinations. So this grammar, that's why it's the most powerful, because it's doing more than one thing. It's giving us a very organized system. It's going to the depth. It not only talks about the surface meaning, but it's basically talking about the depth. It's going to the depth and talking about the deep meanings of sentences. Analyzes the sentences, divides them into parts, demonstrates functions of various parts, rearranges them, shows interrelatedness between sentences, and then again when the sentences are put together to create the discourses, to make longer tests, to get the paragraphs, to make paragraphs. Again, generative grammar is used to see the relationship of different sentences with each other and to create a flow in the larger text to create so that they read well, and the readers, when they are reading it, they read it well and they understand it well, and there is a flow in the paragraph or there is a flow in the text. This can only be done if we are studying especially in the discourse, critical discourse analysis. When we are analyzing the discourses, we again use the generative grammars rules to see what is the relationship of one word with the other and relationship of one sentence with the other sentence, to see the impact of the paragraph or the impact of the discourse, impact of the text, and basically get to the meaning, the actual meaning, the deep meaning of the writer of that paragraph, or basically or also the poet of that piece of poetry. So it shows interrelatedness between the sentences, and it is the most powerful among the 3 types. Of course, the fact we've talked about again and again. I would like you to go again see what we meant with by TGG shows the only meaningful form is not important, but also meaning is also important. So you have to go to the semantic level, you have to go to the meaning, you have to take care that there is a sensible meaning coming out of a sentence. It also shows how sentences are related to one another in a sentence, and TGG takes each part of a sentence and talks about its role. It is different from structural grammar, which only talks about the structure, the meaningful structure, meaningful form. It talks about the visual structure. It talks about the apparent structure, the visible structure of sentences. It doesn't take into account the meaningful linkage of words. It doesn't talk about the semantic level, but here we have people talking about the semantic level as well in the generativism, the theory of generativism given by Noam Chomsky in the 50s. So the word mathematical in the next slide is very important. TG is not a mathematical grammar. It's the processes it describes are not mathematical processes. It's arbitrary. The arrangements are arbitrary. The arrangements may vary in order to change the meanings, in order to get more combinations. There are no mathematical rules that only the words, they are not attached mathematically to each other. You may vary the arrangement of the words in order to get more combinations. Chomsky's grammar is a generative grammar of the transformational type. I would like you to go to this diagram again and see the phrase structure, starting with the phrase structure, which is and looking at the lexical component, that is the deep structure. Moving through transformation comes to the surface structure, and applying the rules of morphology, morphophonemic rules, you go on to get a sentence, a proper meaningful sentence which has a meaning, which has a proper structure as well. So this is basically the flow of the sentence, the process through which a sentence has moved. Coming on to the, I would like you to look at this example, just concluding today's talk. The dog bit the cat, that is a deep structure, a very easy example of this idea. The dog bit the cat and the cat was bitten by the dog, that is the surface structure, and the actual action doer has been given importance, has the active sentence, shows that the power, the strength of the sentence, the strength of the action. Going on to the last slide before the summary, I would like you to see that the rules in TG, we talked about the rules. What are the rules? What they tell us, what they don't tell us. The rules in TG do not tell us how to produce language. They tell us the order in which to put the words and phrases. So basically we are focusing on the order, the arrangement, the rule. They are not talking about how to produce language. They are talking about how to put the language in order. They are talking about the arrangement. They are talking about the right places of words in a sentence. They are talking about the right places of sentences in the text. So TGG allows us to generate an infinite number of sentences via transformations. And grammatical transformations are the rules relating deep and surface structures. Relating deep and surface structures, both of these considerations are taken by the generativists, by the generative grammars, and this is the most powerful among the three types we discussed: the finite straight grammars, the phrase straight grammars, and the transformational generative grammars. Now, what are basically the transformations? What different transformations we can find? Some common transformations that we'll discuss in the coming class. We can have changes in the structure. We can have changes in the meaning. Sometimes we need to focus on a certain part of a sentence. So by changing the place of that part, by changing the arrangement order, we sometimes change the focus. We change the stress of the sentence, or stress of the sentence, or maybe we need to convey more clear meaning, and we do this by just changing the places. So these are different kinds of changes or transformations that may occur in different sentences, and this in detail we are going to talk about in the next class, where we'll be again extending this idea of generative grammars, because it's a very important idea and it's a very detailed idea. It's the whole theory talks about the whole phenomena of what are the rules and how the rules are used to create different millions and billions of combinations, millions and billions of sentences. So what changes, the common changes we normally make in order to get more combinations? These are the transformations which we are going to talk about in the next class. So far in detail we have discussed today what are generative grammars, what are their rules, and how what is basically meant by generative grammars, and what are the three different kinds of grammars: the finite state grammars, the phrase state grammars, and generative transformational generative grammar, which we call TGG. So till the next class, it's goodbye from here, and good luck for the future.